From the Tulsa World, this is Jason Collington, editor of the Tulsa World, and I'm here with Kevin Canfield, one of our veteran reporters. He's covered City Hall for a long time. Kevin joined a number of other movers and shakers in Tulsa, and as they went to a trip to Denver. Kevin, what was the point of the trip, and what were some of the takeaways you think came back on that trip?
Well, this was the 13th annual, what they call inner city visit that the regional chamber sponsors. So they've been going to different cities for 13 years, and the mayor jokingly refers to it as an opportunity to rip off ideas from other communities. But it's basically a chance to go and see how communities are dealing with, some of the same issues that Tulsa is. And so over the years, they've been to like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and places to look at their river development, for example.
Right.
This trip focused on some of the usuals like downtown development, regional partnerships, education, and workforce development. Those are typically parts of the discussions that go on over 2 days. And this, I think the biggest takeaways on this trip were an emphasis on homelessness and how that city addresses the problem.
I remember one of the trips was to Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
And you, when they came back from that trip, the dream was we need an Ohio State University in Tulsa.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's what came out of that. Exactly.
We need a 4-year institution with a championship football team in Tulsa.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that might seem like a fanciful idea, but I do think behind the scenes they're still having that type of discussion about what a positive influence an institution like that. I mean, we have a lot of great higher ed institutions here, but Ohio State is a huge part of Columbus for a lot of different reasons, including economic development. So, whether that ever comes to Tulsa, who knows? But it's it's an idea that I know the mayor has kicked around with folks in the education realm.
I know that the Bedlam series in football is dead, but I think the Bedlam battle between the two schools when it comes to medical facilities,
right
in Tulsa, I think that we're just on the brink of that. But
yeah,
but homelessness, as you said, was kind of one thing that they were kind of looking at. What are some things we need to steal from Denver? Did they think after their trip?
Well, I mean, that discussion began. It was the first session of the day on a Tuesday morning when Denver's mayor, Michael Hancock, was on a panel with Mayor Bynum. And they talked about a lot of subjects, kind of went through the history of Denver. And near the end of that discussion, the homelessness issue came up. And as Mayor Hancock has said, and Mayor Bynum agrees, I mean, this is obviously a nationwide problem, something that all communities are dealing with. And what was interesting, I think, to the mayor and to a lot of people who were there was for a long time, municipalities, cities across the country have basically served as facilitators to provide federal funding to nonprofits and foundations who are doing the work on the ground to help the homeless population. And Hancock's message was, look, we've started to turn the corner and they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into mental health.
Yeah, well, you got affordable housing and homeless in Denver. They're going to spend $190 million this year.
This year.
And as your story predicted, the mayor said it could be $254 million in Denver on affordable housing and homeless programs.
Yeah, and mental health, right? So, as the mayor pointed out when that discussion was going on, that $254 million it's about 2/3 of what the city's general fund budget was this year. So I mean, we're talking a little bit of apples and oranges in the size, right? Denver's a lot bigger, the metro area is a lot bigger. But the idea, Hancock's point was, the cities have to take a more active role, and that means spending money, and so that I know that stirred some thoughts. And, you know, you go into any city, you go into Denver, there's a homeless problem, you know, you could see it. So that was an interesting way to get that discussion going. And then on Wednesday morning, in the final session, Wednesday morning, they put a panel together, meaning the chamber, that had a gentleman whose name I can't remember, but he operates their STAR program, STARR, I believe it's spelled.
Yeah.
And that's similar to what City of Tulsa has. They have a COPES program, and I can't think of the other one, but it's a program where they bring together mental health, CRT, the city CRT program, where the police, fire, and mental health experts, they work together on mental health calls. So basically there's two organizations in Tulsa doing that kind of work in conjunction with the city. But in Denver, they've really upped it, and they've invested a lot more money. It's a lot more integrated. And I think probably, I can't speak for the police or fire departments, but it's got a little longer history. Really good buy-in from the public safety folks in Denver. And speaking of the STAR program, so now you've got mental health experts that go out on their own and handle mental health calls. And according to the gentleman who spoke about this, he said it takes time. You know, you always got to integrate, have the police and fire get comfortable with it. But by his telling, it's really been an effective program. And now they pick up a lot of these calls, and it's made a really big difference. And I think the takeaway from that, from a lot of people, was, how do we upgrade or intensify or multiply our efforts with those types of programs, you know? And they also had mental health experts who went into a lot of the policy, you know, less on the street kind of programming, and talked about mental health funding policies and all that. And so, but it was very informative. And I think the group there took a lot away from it and said, wow, this is cool. And how can we better that work here in Tulsa? And so that was on Wednesday morning. And then they always have a wrap up at the end of these trips, and anyone who wants to gets up and talks. And one of the mayor's takeaways, and it's what I wrote about in one of the stories, was that he basically committed and said, look, we've got to, as a city, be more involved. You know, times have changed. We can't just be passing federal dollars through. We've got to be more involved in this process. And that how that shakes out, that's still to be determined. But I know he's already begun behind the scenes to work on different committees, and, you know, trying to get the right people in place to really come up with a plan. And the city has plans, but it's always been, you know, a case where the foundations, the nonprofits are doing the work, and they sort of come back and report to the city leaders. And I think the mayor now believes it's time for the city government itself to be at the table more and more involved in the day-to-day development of these programs and implementation of them. So.
Well, and one of the programs, the quarterback, if you will, of the homeless effort in Tulsa is Housing Solutions, and you talked to the executive director there. One of their experiments ended up on the front page last year when they took over a hospital. A hotel, and you know, housed people there, and you know, it was a pretty contentious story just because of what you found there, and what people kind of reported out of there, and how many police calls were brought out there. And it was not, from the public point of view, it may not have been seen as a successful experiment. They stopped doing it. If something was a success, they would have kept doing it. And so
I think
there does seem to be a lot of things that are trying to happen. And again, when you talk about the money in Tulsa, last 2 years, as you've reported in this story about this, we've spent $14 million
Right.
on homeless issues.
And most of that's almost all of it. In fact, probably
Federal
everything is
dollars,
federal.
But you know, when you look at Tulsa and Denver, Denver's population about 715,000.
Just the metro, yeah,
Yeah, and then Tulsa's about 400,000, so they're about
Right.
almost double.
right,
But you can see when we're talking a little bit of dollars here and a lot of dollars there. The New York Times just did a special report about how they got rid of 25,000 homeless, how they took care of 25,000 homeless in Houston.
right.
They spent a lot of money. That's how.
Yeah. No, it's a
There's no
huge,
magic- There's no magic thing, and like the mayor said in your story, this is a comprehensive thing. This isn't a one-off. This
Right.
isn't this program and this program. It's a comprehensive thing because, as you said, you got mental health. You have some people who just need a job and need help. You have
Right.
we also have 1,000 evictions a month in this county.
yeah,
I
right.
mean,
No,
that-
it's,
they all contribute.
yeah, and I talked to Becky this week, and Becky Gligo is the executive director of Housing Solutions, and she acknowledges that it's complicated, and I mean, she always has. She knows that world very, very well, and I think everyone has just come to the point where they're trying, like you say, I don't want to say one-offs. That situation with the hotel was precipitated by that bad storm, and and I think Housing Solutions, knows that they had lessons to learn from that. But the city's adopted strategy, or at least through its strategic plan, is to work with Housing Solutions to help find a solution. And the homeless community, through A Way Home for Tulsa, which is a consortium of different foundations, agencies, nonprofits, they believe that housing first is ultimately the best policy, which is, rather than get people well and then put them in housing, the theory is they can't do anything really until they've got a safe place to sleep every night. So,
And that totally makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a theory that has proven out to be true. And again, one of your stories, you talked about the tiny house little village that they had
right.
there in Denver. Talk about that a little bit of what you saw.
Well, so Wednesday, and Wednesday after this conference ended, this trip ended, a couple counselors on their own who had driven out to Colorado for the trip, they wanted to go visit some, look at different housing solutions, different homeless solutions. And so they visited Colorado Collaborative Village. I got that right? No, but it's a nonprofit that operates 2 tiny home villages, probably about 45, 48, 2 different locations, right? So there's about 48 homes altogether, 48, 50. And then you've got what they call SOSs, safe open spaces. And they're really just tent communities, but they have security, they're fenced in,
They got
they have
rules. They got rules.
services.
They got to do chores. They're
Right.
You just can't walk in.
Right. Yeah, right. And you got to be interviewed to get in. So those are 2 options. And I know the counselors were impressed. The counselors that attended, there was only 3, were impressed with how those operations were done, how they were staffed, how they were kept clean, because they are very, from our brief visit, very well-run operations, but that's a nonprofit effort. It's established, I think, in 2017. And like Becky said, I think the people in this community in Tulsa that do that kind of work are not in any way opposed to that. They just think that ultimately, long-term, we've got to be thinking about permanent housing solutions for these people. The program we looked at in Denver, they're transitional living situations where the goal is to get them into that permanent housing. So it'll be interesting to see what movement is, or if any movement takes place on either of those models, because I know the counselors that visited thought they were neat operations, but again, how do you implement it?
Yeah, and again, at the bottom of your story, you mentioned the fact that right now you can't build a tiny house in Tulsa. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
And so they would have to change some of the zoning to allow any tiny house to be built.
Well,
There'd
tiny
be-
house, I'm not a zoning expert. I think you're right. I would just add that if you're going to provide homeless services and cater the community to homeless, then you would need a different zoning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you may be able to just build a tiny home for any Joe Blow, but if it's to work with a homeless population and provide services, you're going to need to change zoning. So
one of the things I think that is, when you go to a city like Denver, which again, it's a major league city, it's got a lot of bells and whistles, and you try to think of what you can steal, just like with Columbus, we'd like Ohio State. From Denver, we'd like this or that. From Pittsburgh, we'd like to do this with the river. I think these trips are really beneficial because again, if you never get outside of the cave, you don't know what's out there.
yeah,
And so I think that these are good trips. There's a reason why we sent you and have sent you on several of these trips. So you can see alongside the city councilors. And again, we think it's important to be where our leaders are, and that's why we sent you with them. I think what it is, like you said, it's now coming back and going, okay, what are we going to do? But like for the first time, and as your front page story says, the mayor's like, okay, the city's got to play a bigger role here.
right.
We've got to make this a priority because he's hearing it from everybody.
Yeah,
Homelessness it's not just a downtown thing.
right.
We got pockets of the city. We got parks
Right.
that have people setting up tents. We've got security and police removing people from areas all the time. So this is something that's a daily thing. I know the Tulsa World's downtown, and we've had several run-ins with homeless. One slapped my cell phone out of my hand the other day when we were confronting him to leave our property. So again, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And again, it sounds like the mayor before he leaves wants to make some things happen before that happens.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and he said exactly what you said when he was talking at the end of the trip about how he really thinks the trips are valuable because of what you just said. You get out of your own space, your own head, sort of for a couple of days in a new environment and see what cities are dealing with and how they're dealing with it. One thing I think is important to keep in mind. I know a lot of the people who attended the trip were, impressed with the commitment that they've made to the things they do, whether it's trying to address homelessness or their parks or things like that. And I spoke with the mayor about that because they have dedicated sales taxes for mental health services or homelessness, and they have one for parks, but it's important to keep in mind their tax structure is a little different than ours. So they have our understanding is that they have a little wiggle room to add 0.25% tax here, 0.25%. That doesn't mean something like that's not doable here, but it's not an apples for apples comparison. They have a little wiggle room. I think their state tax situation is a little different than ours. So that gives them a little opening to.
And the last thing before we get out of here, another topic that was discussed, and again, we're going to have all the links to Kevin's coverage while this Denver trip in the description of this podcast. But the last thing that kind of brought up was the airport there in Denver, which many of us in Oklahoma have gone to and flown through. 74 million people going through that airport now.
Yeah.
Talk about what the mayor said about the construction of that airport and the expansion that they did, what was it, back in the 90s, and what that has meant for Denver.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that first conference when Mayor Hancock was there, they do a good job. They went through the history of the city, its ups and downs, and he was asked, well, what's been the most transformational thing the city's done, and he said it's the airport. I mean, it allows access the city to reach out literally to the whole world. Not to mention it brings in people from all over the world. And so they had Stapleton. I don't know if you remember Stapleton, but they had Stapleton International Airport for years, which is a decent airport. But then they poured a ton of money into building this new airport, and it's just transformed the city. That and making Denver, it's got a lot of natural assets that make it an appealing place, but
Sure.
encouraging good talent to come to the city, which is a theme that Tulsa has had. And the mayor's always talked about improving quality of life to draw good talent. But so those two things have really made a huge impact. I mean, there's a trolley. Well, I'll tell you this and then I'll end. But Mike Neal, the CEO and chairman of the Tulsa Regional Chamber, when he got a chance to talk about the neat things he saw in Denver, he talked about Union Station, which is an old train station, which they spent a lot of money to remodel, and it's beautiful. And I went through there, and a lot of others on the trip, because you can take a train from the airport about 25 minutes ish, and it brings you to Union Station. You get off, it's this beautiful little station downtown, and you can get a coffee, get something to eat. There's a bar there. It's just a lot of cool amenities. And that's an example of how the airport has served to link not only Denver to the rest of the world, but downtown Denver to the airport area. And you could see it when you take that trip, the development that's gone from downtown, or basically from Union Station, you go out to, and you see all this development in places where there's not much else, but there's a lot of development around that transportation hub. And he said he was told that the city invested $200 or $300 million, speaking in round numbers, to redo the train station, Union Station, but that from that investment, there's been $8 or $9 billion of investment around the train station. Sure. It's real close to Coors Field. So that whole nexus of business development, economic development, and transportation is something that I think a lot of people took away from the trip,
Well, hey, Kevin, I appreciate you taking the trip. Appreciate all the reporting you did on it. As I said, we'll link to all your coverage here if you haven't caught up on it. But again, what ideas should Tulsa steal from Denver? It's an interesting trip, interesting idea. And again, thank you for going. Again, we'll have this on TulsaWorld.com. You can watch this also on YouTube. And again, we appreciate you. Follow us. Again, subscribe. Let's see, what's the words I'm supposed to say? Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We are on
Spotify. Yes. Don't forget Spotify.
Don't forget.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thank you, Kev. We'll talk to you next time.
All right. See ya.
See you.